you've come to know and love of may, might, would, should, or could. They also will be used dependently, so they'll be used in coordination with other things in sentences. If subjunctive verbs may or may not happen, what tense does not exist with subjunctive verbs? What do you think? No, that's just a different mood. Yeah? Future, right. In the indicative mood, which are all the verbs you've learned up through today, verbs either will or will not happen. They either happened or didn't happen. So if I will go to the store or I will not go to the store, that's future tense. But if I say I may go to the store, well, that's a whole other level, right? Because I may go to the store. It's not happening now. It's not definitively happening in the future, but it still has this idea that it's not happening now. So if there's no future tense, what also is there not in subjunctive mood? Yeah? Future perfect, exactly. So there you go. We've single-handedly cut down your verb tense responsibilities by 1/3 in the subjunctive mood. Awesome. I thank you. How come only one person is happy by this new achievement? All right. I could use my clicker. 11 students have joined. Our code for today: jumpy oboes, jinx, saucy dogs. I don't know any saucy dogs. Okay, today we are learning about your very first subjunctive tense. Yeah? Yes. Yes. It probably will not be shared with you until after tomorrow, though, because we're not going to get through the whole thing today. Okay. So you should be taking notes on the proceedings so that you do have something to work off of. All right. Imperfect subjunctive is by far and away the easiest subjunctive tense to form, to read, to identify, to know. And the reason it is so darn easy is that you're just taking the second principal part / the present infinitive, and you're adding on endings. That's it. Easy peasy, as they say. The only slight adaptation from what you know to what you now will know is that in the subjunctive mood, your first person singular ending will always be M. Makes some sense. But all you do is you take your infinitive and then put the endings on. Done. It sure is.
Is this the same for like passive and active? Like would there be?
Well, here, you can pass it, don't worry.
But what does it do with? Would all this stuff exist for what deponents?
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of like weird for that though.
Yeah, we're getting there. Don't worry, my friend. So here's a little sample for you. If we took one of your favorite must-know verbs, maneo, manere, this is what it looks like in imperfect subjunctive. It's just the infinitive and then an ending. Not bad. I am fairly certain that in the midst of your fierce note-taking, some of you are curious. How do I translate an imperfect subjunctive? Good news for everyone! Imperfect subjunctive gets translated the same way that indicative subjunctive got translated. Was or were blanking. That's it. It's only when subjunctive verbs are used independently that they get different translations. And in Latin, the only time you'll really see them being used independently is with present tense. Present tense is the hardest subjunctive. This is easy. We're going to be traveling down a little bit of a path, going from easy to hard, and then the present tense is really fun. Fun. A welcome challenge.
Fun or fun like fun? It's like, I can't remember.
It's a little bit of both. Depends on your perspective. I happen to be a huge subjunctive fan. All right, your turn. Peto petere. On your screens, I would like for you to create imperfect subjunctives for the verb peto petere. Well, yeah, there's 6 of them. You don't have to provide English, just Latin is fine. All right, we have 8 responses in, 9, 10. Let's go see what y'all are working on here. Okay, peterem, peteres, peteret, peteremis, peteretis, peterent. Beautiful. This one is correct also. This one here, the vertical one, seems to be on point as well. Good. Good, so your first run out of the gate, you seem to be pretty successful in imperfect subjunctives. You could try to leave out all the extra spaces for our benefit. That would be lovely. All right, deponent verbs. They're more or less similar. Let's talk about the more. You are still working from an infinitive. However, you need an active infinitive on which to put endings. So you have to artificially create an active infinitive. So when we first learned and reviewed infinitives in February, you learned the relationship between active and passive infinitives. When we talked about deponent verbs in March, we sort of cemented that relationship between what active infinitives look like versus what passive infinitives look like. This is where you really need to have that information locked solidly in your brain so that you can make that transition between ARI and ARE seamlessly. Because you have to be able to look at an ARI and know, wait a second, I have to change that to ARE before I can do anything. But now that you have something that looks like a present active infinitive, then all you have to do is add some endings. But since you all are fresh off your deponent verb tests, you know that deponent verbs get passive endings. So quickly, tell me what your passive endings are. Just give a quick summary. The very typical passive endings. They don't have to be tense specific, just the endings themselves. Six responses, 7. Let's start showing them. Aristor, murmuriantor. Excellent. Very good. Okay, so in our deponent sample that we started with before, here we have conora, conari. We changed it to an active infinitive for the purpose of this exercise. And then we put on the passive endings. So I know it sounds totally awkward, but conarer, conareris, conaretur, conaremer, conaremini, and conarenter. That would be a sample. Yeah. Okay. Your turn. Moror, morari, moratus sum. Conjugated in imperfect subjunctive. Just the Latin, no English necessary. All right, we have 10 responses in, so let's start looking. Morarer, morar, not tis. This is supposed to be wrist here as an ending. Morareter, moraremer. Sounds like you have marbles in your mouth, right? Moraramini, morarentor. This is probably supposed to be an R. Little typo. I suppose E is next to R, right? Okay. Here, I don't. This is anonymous. I know that. But whoever wrote this, please keep in mind that deponent verbs will always get passive endings. So you're always going to want R, ris, ter, mer, mini, and etor. Okay. Even though, yes, I know that that's what we did for our first sample, deponent verbs march to a slightly different standard. All right, the rules that we just established for creating active infinitives works for first, second, and fourth conjugation. And then here's third/third IO. It's the same thing. You end up with an active infinitive that looks like it belongs to the third conjugation. Nothing is wildly different. It's just a question of remembering and memorizing that relationship between a passive infinitive and an active one, and making sure that you know that relationship inside and out in order to take something that looks like this and to make something that looks like that. Okay? And then you add passive personal endings, and you get this one, which again sounds terribly awkward if you go to say it. Egredarer, egredarer, egrederater, egrederamer, egredaramini, and egredarenter. Yeah, basically. And then still, standard imperfect translations. I was leaving, you were leaving, he was leaving, etc., etc. It's how it gets used in a sentence, which we'll talk about more right now. Okay. We started our subjunctive conversation off today by talking about the very essential fact that subjunctive verbs may or may not happen. That is their essential truth. When they are used alone, you use English words to help you out. Would, should, could, may, might. And that makes it seem very potential in nature, right? He would go to the game today, if he had his gear with him. I should go see my teacher after school, Again, that's subjunctive, it's potential. Most often in Latin, at least, and most of our work for the next 6 weeks or so, is that subjunctive verbs get used in dependent clauses. If it's dependent, that means it needs something else in the sentence in order to truly make sense. So it'll be used in sentences where a subjunctive phrase, which contains a subjunctive verb, is relying on an indicative phrase in order to work. The indicative phrase, now indicative are the verbs you've learned up until today. The indicative phrase will be independent, IND, IND. Subjunctive clauses will be dependent. And the word clause really just refers to a group of words or a part of sentence that's relying on a verb that has some sort of like action to it. The very first type of subjunctive clause sentence that we'll be studying, and there are, I believe, 6 total, they're called indirect questions. So that's where we're going to start working between today and tomorrow. So this is the first type of sentence that will officially have subjunctive verbs with it. You're probably familiar with the basics of an indirect question because of your vast experience with indirect statements. An indirect statement, as you know, had like an embedded statement inside of a larger one, right? What were the 3 requirements for an indirect statement? Think back to February. Yeah. Yep.
It was the accusing subject.
Yes. An infinitive. Good. So we had a head verb, we had an accusative subject, and then we had an infinitive. We don't have infinitives anymore with indirect questions. We've already used up our infinitive card for indirect statements. So here we are, and yet we have a similar relationship between direct versus indirect. Were the boys going to the baths today? That's a question, right? Put that question into a larger statement. Mother does not know if the boys were going to the baths today. A direct question. When was Cornelia eating dinner? Right? It makes sense to ask a question like that. Marcus wondered when Cornelia was eating dinner. Why was Flavia sending a letter? Embed that in something larger. Cornelia asked why Flavia was sending a letter. Whom was Cornelius inviting to dinner? Aurelia wonders whom Cornelius was inviting to dinner. What do all of these indirect questions share? What type of thing? Not the exact word. Yeah? Yeah, they all start with a head verb, for sure. So it's important to start distinguishing which sentences have head verbs, and then within the head verb sentences, which sentences are which. Yeah. What's that? They can be. Yeah. Because I could say, do you know why Caitlin is leaving school early? The direct question, why is Caitlin leaving school early? But the indirect question, do you know why? So you could theoretically have it as a question. Matt?
They have like this subordinate clause.
Right. So here at the beginning, here we have this independent clause. Cornelia asked. That's independent. And then Matt used his highfalutin fancy grammar term of a subordinate clause, which is exactly what a dependent subjunctive clause is. They're subordinate, which means they answer to something larger in order to make sense. Cornelia asked is a fine sentence, and that makes sense. But if I just said to you why Flavia was sending a letter, and if I keep the words in that order, you have no idea what I'm talking about. Right? Because it's not directly worded as a question. So yes, this whole thing is subordinate to that whole thing. What else do they all share apart from a head verb? They all have something else in common. Well, yeah, I mean, they have verbs, so they have to have some kind of subject. True. That's okay. All right. What else? Matt?
They kind of all have, they don't really know what it is, but they all have like if, when, why, like something that would like start with a question.
Absolutely. Yes. All indirect question sentences have to start with a question word. I have 3 slides of popular question words. So the first question word is who. You've seen this. What, when, where, And then there are two wheres. There's the where location, as in where is my backpack? Where the directional question, where are you going today? No?
It's not the same.
No, because where direction is like implies a motion. Where is our lacrosse game today? You know, bus driver, where are you taking us? All right, so make sure you're taking down all of these indirect question or question words. Yeah. You must have a question word if you're going to assume that you're dealing with an indirect question. Indirect questions all require a question word of some sort, shape, or form. You don't have to include your own clip art. It's just my stuff.
Yeah.
Are you ready for slide number 2 of question words? Why, how many, if, and what kind of. So a direct question from chapter 16. What kind of boy is Texas? Very, very good. But the indirect question form of that, you know, Thomas does not know what type of boy Sextus is. Well, obviously you do, but just play along for the example. We will pick up with the question words tomorrow. I know, you can hardly wait. You can, in the meantime, close your Chromebooks, etc., etc.
So have you